name is Peter Easy. I'm the Territory Sales Manager for Ronix Graphics, covering the Western United States, Western Canada too, and Central Canada. So thank you guys for joining me this morning. I think we have 1 minute, but I just wanted to, quickly find out where, what you guys do, where you guys are from. So let's start with you.
My name's Teresa.
Okay, nice to meet you.
South of Salt Lake.
Okay.
And I print.
Okay. What device do you use?
Roland.
Okay.
Roland and color management is a big deal.
And you're currently using ONYX?
No.
But do you use the VersaWorks?
VersaWorks.
Awesome.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
What about you?
Yeah, I do. I'm a one-man operation in Southwest Wyoming, and I reproduce artworks. It's one of the things I do, and then that includes digitizing and then getting prints on paper or canvas. And I just use the Canon Pro Tools as an interface to my printer.
Okay. So you have the Canon IPF?
Excuse me?
Your printer is what? The Canon IPF? What printer do you use?
The Pro 4000.
Yeah. Ready to know about you? Spoke to you already. What about you guys?
I currently print with, I use ONYX. I currently print with a 560. Use a OSE Colorado 1650. So we use ONYX on that one. We love the Icc Profile management that they have with the 1650.
Okay.
Which is awesome when you need to calibrate some things.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to get started so I don't give you guys, I know you guys have a lot of things to do. Okay, so basic color management, like I said, first name Peter, last name pretty simple. It's pronounced easy, everybody says easy, I let it go. So some of the common color terms when you're talking about color, you see them on the screen, CMYK, RGB, input ICC, rendering intent, source ICC, all of this. Do these terms look familiar to all of you? Like you guys understand what this means? When we talk about color management in this space, pretty much what that means is the communication of the associated data required for unambiguous interpretation of color content data and application of color data conversions as required to produce the intended reproductions. That is a very long statement. In layman's speak, when we refer to color management, we're talking about taking in input ICC and having it come out as output ICC and expecting the same result consistently. Pretty much that is the whole point of color management. The ICC, the International Color Consortium, comes together, determines what we consider color in this digital printing space, and they put forward specific standards that are currently used. You might have heard terms like ICC version 2, ICC version 3. Currently, the current standard is ICC Max. That is the latest color standards. And one of the benefits of using ONYX as your preferred RIP software is the standards we use for profiling in our software is ICC Max. So we're on the most recent version. Now, why does this matter? When you're working with files from your customers and they're sending you files, they could be sending you files from whatever application they use to come up with those. There's no way for you to know if they're standardized. The dollars to donuts, if they are using some sort of Adobe Creative Suite to create those files, they are probably using the latest version of ICC. So having a software that has that profiling system inbuilt into it means when you get a file, JPEG, TIFF, PDF, if it was saved using an ICC Max and you're using a software that has ICC Max as well, then you're closer to hitting that target just by default. In the past, when Adobe was something you bought outright, and you had to kind of pay for upgrades. Some customers could be on version 2, some customers could be on version 3. Now with Creative Cloud, you kind of get updated whether you want it or not. So they will always be on the most recent standard, and that's what we try to do in ONYX. So what is an Icc profile? You mentioned the Icc profile. It is pretty much the color ID of the device. So the Icc profile contains the gamut, the whole set of colors of a device in comparison to the lab space. It gives back its eyesight to any device. So an Icc profile is created during the calibration of a device when you're printing a photo on a calibrated printer. The color management program is going to read the printer's Icc profile in order to know what RGB values it must send, taking its characteristics into account. Pretty much without an Icc profile, what you would have is when you send that data and your printer gets that, it would send RGB values. And RGB values are those values we expect to see on the screen. That is what your computer screen is, that is what your TV screen is, which isn't what your printer prints in, or every printer operates in the CMYK space. So without an Icc profile, you're pretty much, what you're having is your printer has no way to understand how am I going to take these RGB colors and then translate them to the CMYK that I'm supposed to print. And typically that is kind of the first step where you start to see those shifts in colors. This is a simple CMYK color model. Cyan, magenta, yellow, black. You know, different levels produce different colors. You get those variations. Like I mentioned, RGB, pretty much what we see on screen, which will, you know, doesn't matter what anybody says, what you see on screen isn't going to match what you print. No printer can perform that magic to take an RGB and automatically bring it out, you know, to look the same. Color management in G7. Now, a lot of people don't actually work with G7. There are very few customers, especially in the American market, that really require G7. It is pretty big in Europe, and they tend to use G7, but what G7 is CMY gray balance. You mentioned getting grays earlier and how difficult it is to get grays. G7 is a method to ensure a similar appearance across multiple devices. It's used consistently to hit desired color targets. It's designed to align all processes, substrates, and inks, and it's a global specification for targeting gray balance. So if you have, now before you can get into G7, you need to have a printer that is capable of G7 printing. Not every printer on the market is capable of G7 printing. But if you have a printer that is capable of printing in G7, what it should do is it should make it easier for you to hit a perfect, almost hit a perfect gray. And we say almost because gray, it is very hard to know what a perfect gray is, but G7 will help you get there. But you typically have to find out beforehand if you're going to work specifically on grays, if your printer is G7 ready. In ONYX, we have tools, what we call G7 pass and fail tools. We don't actually, no RIP software actually generates G7. You know, that's the common misconception. But you have, there are RIP softwares out there that can let you know if you pass or fail that G7 check, and we have those tools in ONYX. This is a file, this sample file we actually embed in the ONYX RIP software. The reason why we embed this sample file in the ONYX RIP software is we use it as a quality test. When you buy the software, you print this file. All the recipes for the colors on this chart, you know, you have those recipes. And typically this is kind of like a starting point. If everything looks good here, you know your printer is almost printing the way it should print. And we produced this file, we've done it with our color scientist in-house, and it has those targets. And the goal is if you can get those targets as close to that, then you're already on the right path. I like to include this slide just to explain fundamentally what a RIP is. And pretty much what a RIP does is it takes vector files and pretty much rasterizes it, converts it to a bitmap that all digital printers understand. Without a RIP software, You mentioned using like the Color Pro for your IPF, which is fine. Printers like that typically will work with a Windows print driver or some plugin. A lot of them you don't usually hear RIP software when you're discussing printers like that, the smaller size printers. But what happens in your scenario is when you use a Windows print driver to run something like that, your printer doesn't understand anything color. All it is doing is it's taking a generic file and it's just printing that as best as it can. The tools Canon have provided help you get closer, but without a RIP software, there's no one-to-one conversation between, hey, I have this file, and I need to print it to look exactly the way I want it to do in a language you understand. That is pretty much what a RIP software does. Every RIP software, when we say RIP software, we're pretty much taking a file, converting it to a language that printers, digital printers understand. Now, why colors don't match sometimes? No device in publishing system can reproduce the full range of colors viewable to the human eye. Each device operates within a specific color space, RGB or CMYK, that can produce a certain range or gamut of colors. Colors can shift in appearance as you transfer documents between different devices. Again, coming down to what you see on screen isn't what you necessarily print. When we talk about gamut, that is also, not to like beat you guys, I don't want you guys beating yourselves up. There's certain printers that will perform better than other printers. It all has to do with the ink configuration. If you have more ink configuration, then you have the chance of hitting a higher gamut of colors is higher than someone that has, a 4 ink configuration printer. It is not you, it is not lack of skill. If I have a printer that has 10 colors and you have a printer that has 4, my gamut is going to be higher than yours. That is just the default. You can try to get closer, but the performance there will be a variation in performance between those two printers. And this is where, this is kind of like a demonstration of what I mean by the gamut. So if you're looking at something like this is the color space. Now, you see the RGB has a bigger gamut, covers a bigger gamut in space, and then the CMYK does that. So fundamentally, when you're telling your printer, a CMYK printer to print, and you were seeing it on screen, you're taking something this wide, and you're trying to bring it into that. That's what you're pretty much doing. When you see the file on screen, and you tell your printer to print, you're taking something that was this big, you're saying pull it into this space that my printer understands, and then reproduce that color. So fundamentally, you're already shrinking that gamut down when you go from RGB to CMYK. How many of you guys have a spectrophotometer, a color device? Do you guys have those, know what those are, use them regularly?
In the past.
Okay. So the color management basic workflow, the input scanner, the Icc profile, color management, back and forth, your output profile, then to your RGB printer. In between this workflow, your display, your monitor sits in between that, which is obviously displaying RGB, so you're seeing something else. So your scanner translates color to this, your monitor knows to show this, and then your printer can print this. Pretty much this is what color management is we start with this, we tell the screen this is what we want to print, and then we translate that to the actual printer, printing the same thing we started out from here. That is fundamentally what color management is all about. The most basic way to get color management, and this is the step, this is the first step, this is the first thing you have to do, is you have to profile. Profiling, media profiles are the first place to start at. It is, no matter what challenges you're having with color, if you don't have the correct media profile, you've not started to solve that problem. And the general idea behind profiling is when you profile, you don't just, you know, there is a challenge. It is easy to say, hey, we use 2 types of vinyl and we're going to create one profile for both. It's very easy to do, you know, time constraints and all of that. But the rule for profiling is for every media you use, you should have a specific profile for it. Even if you're using very similar vinyl. Sure, you could get away with it, but when you start trying to hit specific Pantone, specific brand, corporate colors, the vinyl you bought today isn't the vinyl you bought yesterday, even from the same manufacturer. You know, they could have changed the way they produced the vinyl. They could have changed this tree they used to start the process. There's many factors we don't control, we don't know about. The way to make sure that everything stays consistent is to build profiles. It sounds difficult, it sounds hard, it sounds complicated. If you have a color device, you're literally 50% there. Without a color device, you cannot build profiles. You get a color device, a spectral, you're halfway to building profiles. And a lot of other people will say, oh no, it's all of this. Yes. You know, if I wanted to build a profile for Ferrari red, and I use Ferrari red as an example because I've worked with that color from Ferrari, it will require 6 hours of work and a lot of stuff. But that's a specific thing. But to build a generic profile, especially in ONYX and the tools we give you, I can build a simple profile that will pass in 30 minutes. And I'm by no means an expert. But in 30 minutes, I can build a profile that will pass. But without a color device, I pretty much can't go anywhere. So having one of those in your shop will help you start to build profiles. Now, profiles are a means of communicating color, as I said. Now, one other thing, again, I have this PowerPoint, but I really want to give like simple, easy things you can go do right now that will improve your workflow while I'm talking about this PowerPoint. So one of the things you see in here, the input Icc is the target color, CMYK US Web Codec Swap version 2. I'm going to focus on this. This is the standard we use in North America by default. So when you buy, you know, whatever it is, when you open Adobe, Photoshop, Illustrator, or whatever InDesign, the standard profile that you're using to design files is this, if you do not change it. Why does this matter? A lot of people don't usually tell you to do this, but the first step to color management is making sure this matches also in your RIP software. So whatever RIP software you're using, there's typically a setting where you go into. In ONYX, again, we make it very easy. There's a place to determine what your input profiles are. And if you're designing with this, you want to set your RIP software to this. Because if you have this in your design software, and then you have a different profile in your RIP software, fundamentally, when you bring the file in, you're already giving it 2 different instructions. And with the Adobe Creative Cloud, they actually have a tool called Adobe Bridge that allows you to pick specific settings and then hit send, and it just sends that out to Photoshop, Illustrator, and everything else. So instead of going in there and making sure every setting is changed for every one of those tools, just do it in Adobe Bridge, and then it sends it out to all the other applications. But this is the first part you want to start with. And I'm not saying you have to use this standard. This standard is just something we use in the US. In Europe, they use a different standard by default. Whatever you choose to print in, make sure it matches what you designed the files in. That is fundamentally the first thing you can do to just improve performance. Rendering intents, pretty much what this means is how gamut colors get mapped to the available gamut. So a lot of printers will usually sit between the 86 to 92% in terms of gamut that they cover. Your rendering intent is pretty much how you explain how your specific device interprets the color model. Perceptual, relative colorimetric, absolute saturation, dark point compensation. Again, this is also another setting in your design software. I believe in Adobe, the default is perceptual. Again, if you are using that same thing, you want to make sure in the RIP software, it is the same exact thing that you're using. So those are the two settings you should check in your design software. Figure out what those are, decide if that's what you want to use, and then make sure that matches in the ONYX RIP software. So rendering intents, the input profile was set to a newspaper profile. Relative and absolute render color in the same way, but absolute incorporates a paper tint. This is primarily used for proofing. So this is an example of the difference of those two rendering intents. And that is why I said the setting matters. So imagine if, like in my Adobe, I designed with this, but then my RIP was set to this. I can see a clear difference already in these two files. They are the same files, but this has this grayish tint to it. Because when I brought it in there, if my RIP was set to define what my intents were, and it was set to this, then my printer printed with this, even though I started here. So that is why making sure those settings, you coordinate those settings are important, because you could get a shift, and it could be something as simple as this. I mentioned the benefit of having this for calibration, and calibration is simply, I did all the steps. You know, I went through, got my printer printing, did maintenance. We have a good profile, but now something is off. You just need to recalibrate your printer. It happens if, you know, whatever, humidity, temperature, something shifted it. The recalibration is something you can do to get back to that point. You cannot do it without a spectrum. You need a spectrum to be able to do recalibrations. So investigating into this, back in the day, this used to be expensive. There's still expensive versions of this. You can get the most common brands for the Spectrum, X-Rite. You can get a handheld device for $1,200, $1,300. And you don't have to change it out all the time. Pretty much, I've had the same one for the last 5 years. So, you know, it's something to invest in. You know, it will get you most of the way once you have this tool. And I will show this in the software, but in ONYX, this is just an image of what we have. The CMYK image, CMYK vector, RGB. So at this point, I'm defining what profiles to use for that. You know, so whatever I'm using in Adobe, I come into ONYX, and then I set the matching stuff. So that when it comes in, I know everything is standardized between my design and my RIP software. In ONYX, we also have this one button. We have this use embedded profile when available, use rendering intent when available. Why do we have this here? It's times when you're working with specific stuff, like when a customer has sent you, a corporate customer has sent you a file designed by their preference, they have their specific profiles that they've used. When a file comes in tagged with a specific profile, if you have that button checked on, we will respect whatever profile was brought in from your design software. And that is why you have to be the one that decides what the standard is in your shop. Do you guys print with a specific standard regardless of what happens? Then you want to leave that button unchecked. But if you do what the customer wants you to do, then having that button checked, we have that option there. I'm of the school of thought to where I was visiting with Interform, Darren and his team yesterday. I went to their shop. I'm of the school of thought where I do not like customers dictating color to me. I do not let them tell me what it should look like. I tell them what I'm capable of printing, I give them my options, and then I try, you know, to make sure they stick within what my printer is capable of. Because anybody could give you a corporate color to hit. Absolutely. Certain printers won't perform as well. And it's always good to know beforehand if you can match a color before you take that job. Because the last thing you want to do is waste all this media, print stuff, and then not get close to doing it. So I feel there's a value in you figuring that out first before actually taking a job to know if my printer can hit that. In our software, we have, and I'll talk about this while showing the actual software. So in the software, we have this tool called Media Manager. This is pretty much the tool we use for managing profiles. Now, see, when I launched it the first time, it's asking me for a color device. But this is how the tool we use in building profiles. And I'm going to use this to show you when I say building a profile in ONYX, if you have a color device, it's not as complicated. So if I wanted to build a profile for a printer, and I go to New Media Profile, pretty much, as you can see, we actually have the steps listed out that you have to follow. And on the right side, we have explanations of what those steps mean. And we won't let you move forward without following those steps. So if I try to move, it would say you haven't put in the name for your media profile. So we make sure you do all the steps you have to do to get you there. And yes, again, there's a whole lot to it that, you know, for first-time profile builders, you might not understand. But we do give you the steps for you to build a profile. And once you've built one profile, the rest comes to tweaking it. Literally just comes to tweaking it, playing around with it. One of the parts that, pretty much all of this part, the beginning part of this, pretty straightforward, is hey, in configuration to use CMYK. Now, for most printers, CMYK is pretty much the way you want, it's fine. If you have a printer that is more than a 4-color printer that has 8 colors, sure, if it has spot colors, you want to factor in the spot colors, white, orange, whatever. You want to put those in when you're building this. The difference between saying what in configuration to use and where it says select the process colors to use for rendering images, this is you're choosing what inks you're using to print on that specific media. Here, this one is not about what you're printing. Process colors is what colors should I reflect in this media profile. When you're doing a profile, for example, for like a 6-color device, you don't need to render in all 6 colors. Because light cyan and light magenta, for example, they expand the gamut of magenta and cyan, but you don't need to literally process in those. You don't need your printer to process those colors, but you can use that to build. You can build the profile in 6-color, but CMYK for processing is fine. You don't need to use every ink channel you have, when you're selecting what to use to render images. The part where we start to get where, okay, you might be like, okay, I need to know what I'm doing is, and again, like I said, we make it very easy. Here we say print the test image. So when you've done this part, you literally could print the test image to see how far you've come. Make sure everything is still looks good. Now when we get to ink restrictions, that's where, yes, okay. I know people see this and they're like, okay, now what does ink restrictions means? What am I doing here? It'll tell you to print the swatch. When you print the swatch, what you're doing in ink restrictions is, and I have a very good diagram to explain ink restrictions. So, pretty much what you're doing in ink restriction, this is what you're doing in there. The purpose of ink restricting is to reduce each of the printer's ink channels so that none of the individual channels exceed the material's ink holding capacity. So what you're doing there is pretty much trying to figure out how much ink do I need to lay down on my specific media to where I'm not putting down way too much ink or way too little ink. And this is one part of profiling that people need to pay a lot of attention to and matters, because if you're putting ink down on vinyl, on clear vinyl, you're going to obviously use less ink than if you're doing it on heavy banner material. So this is the part where once you understand how ink restrictions work, here, literally 70%, almost 80% of your profile is almost done. Because once you figure out, hey, this is the right amount of ink for my media, where it's not running off, it dries on time, you've literally, when I profile, this is the part I spend time on. Now, you could ask, how do I know, where to stop with my ink, if I'm putting down too much ink? As silly as it sounds, there's no high-tech way of figuring this out. I still use the touch test. I print the chart. I start at, if I'm printing something that needs to pop, I'll start at 100%. I start at 100%, print the chart, and literally rub my finger on it. And it will print different blocks with different percentages of ink. 80%, 90%, and I just run my finger on all of them and see which one comes off. If it comes off at 100%, then I'm putting too much ink down, pretty much. So, understanding ink restriction, the calibration steps, again, we put this in the software, give you an idea of what this means, explains it. When I'm doing a simple profile and I'm just doing one, I usually don't spend enough time on this. I look at my chart, and if my chart is consistent, if I have this consistent rise, I pretty much go forward with that. The only time, again, I would need to tweak this is if I was trying to hit something very, very specific, very difficult. Grays, some reds, then I would spend more time playing around here. But again, ink restriction, this is a step. The other part here, ink limiting. This as well, pretty much same way as ink restriction establish the maximum usable per channel ink for media. Ink limiting does this for 2 or more combined channels. So when we're doing it for one, each of your channels in ink restrictions, what you're doing in ink limiting is you're doing it for 2 or more. So when 2 or more colors combine to form another color, you're trying to determine here where is the appropriate level where it blends and I still see my colors, but again, I'm not putting down too much ink. Ink restrictions, ink limiting, those two, once you do this two and you get this two down, you're done with profiling. I just want to show you like my slide. Pretty much once you're done with that, you're done with profiling. You figure those two out, ink restrictions and ink limiting, the profiling step is no longer this magical thing. That is the part where you can literally build a profile once you figure that out. And the good thing about those two is you don't necessarily have to repeat it every single time. Like, I mentioned printing it and rubbing it off. Sure, I would do that the first time I was doing 13-ounce banner material. I would do that. And then if I was doing a profile for 14-ounce banner material, I don't necessarily need to go back to doing those steps. 13 ounce, 14 ounces, pretty much the same. I know if I were to go with the same values I use for my 13 ounce, tweak it a little bit, I will probably get the same consistent results. You know, those materials are pretty similar. So it's not like every single time I profile, I have to go back in there and do those steps. I will build a profile for the new material, but I will literally skip those steps and just plug in my values because they're pretty similar to what I've done before. So first, just going back to it, color management. First step, make sure your settings are unified across the design and the RIP software you're using. I know not everybody in this class is using ONYX. I'm not very familiar with how other people do it, but I'm almost certain there's a way to set that up. It has to be in there. Second step is profiling. You want to learn, you can get training for profiling. We offer training, remote training, video trainings for profiling on our website at ONYX. We post videos. They do get very nerdy, but we post long-form videos on YouTube. They do. We post long-form videos on YouTube, free, when we do seminars, talking about some of the things you need to go into. There's 2-hour videos on ink restrictions and ink limiting. You can't get lost in the weed in those. But fundamentally, the first, I joined this industry 4 years ago. I'm not a printing expert by no means. I've never worked in the print industry. And I can do this. And I learned how to do this. Yes, I got training at ONYX, but I don't have a printer at home. What I learned how to do is by literally trial and error. I would go to my resellers and I would be like, hey, I want to work here. I bought myself a Spectro and I would take my Spectro and I would play around with it and I would do it. But without learning how to, doing the first step, which is trying to get this done, you could attend multiple classes like this, it won't change anything. I just want to be, until you get that device and you start playing around with it and start asking focused questions, because you'll get to a point where you're like, hey, I did this, I followed the steps, I did all of this, it still, isn't looking right. Then you'll have someone like me or someone smarter than me that you can reach out to and be like, hey, it looks like this, it should look like this, and then they'll tell you, hey, do this. And this is why doing this will fix it. And from there, you literally start to learn how to do this, to where now profiling is something you can do in 20 minutes. I work with people that can go to any one of the printers out there and run a profile in 10 minutes. I cannot do it, but they can do it. But they've been doing this for years. They've had enough time, hands-on time, playing with printers, playing with color devices. So first step to getting color management. There's no magical, hey, this is one fix for all. There are RIP softwares out there, ONYX being one of them, that have tools that help you get closer. And one of those tools that I'm going to show here, and I was going to wait to talk about this in the class, but this is tied in the second class, but this is specifically tied to color management. We have this tool called Swatchbox, which I know is probably one of the things that drives all of you crazy. If you get a color recipe from a customer, they tell you, hey, match this color. And you have to do it. It is what the business is. It is the common, it's the industry knowledge is, hey, we give them a color, they have to match it. This tool, thankfully, does not require you to have profiling experience. We've made it very easy. You don't need to know anything about profiles when you're using this tool. If you have ONYX, most of our products have this tool. If I got a recipe, you mentioned getting corporate colors. If I got a recipe, and the recipe could come in any form, LAB, CMYK, RGB, or it could come as a spot color. We have Pantone, the Pantone library in our software. So if I got
Now, I got a question on that.
Sure.
So Pantone came out and they're not playing well with the rest of the industry at this point. So,
Not us.
uh,
Fortunately for us, not us. We still have the relationship with Pantone.
okay.
Yeah, it's still an ongoing fight between them and Adobe. But there was an announcement that said, hey, we were going to pull it out. But last I saw, they've extended it because there might be an agreement in sight soon. But for Ronix, we still have the relationship. Our relationship with Pantone is outside of what people do. Like we license from Pantone, we talk to them, we work with them. We have the library. Again, in the second class with the ONYX tools, I will show you something that we've come up with. In an event where that fight, doesn't end well for the other people, we have something that we've just introduced that could help, reduce the pain. Will not replace Pantone, that is what it is. But for Ronix, I've not heard anything. I know for a fact that we don't have any problems with them. We still have the library in here. We just launched a new version and we still have the library in there, which lets me know, the fight is not with us. So yeah, if you had to match a specific Pantone, whatever they've given you, you come into this tool, you pick the Pantone you're trying to match. And then you hit OK. So what this tool is I have my LED values for the Pantone. I got this recipe, it's in there. It generates a swatch where it adjusts lightness and chroma by a certain tolerance level. And you pick this, the default is ±5, but you can make it ±1, whatever. And then it starts to shift that. So on the horizontal, as the colors start to shift towards the right side, it's adjusting those values. And then vertical, up and down, is adjusting the chroma. You can do a 3D patch if you want to account for hue, but 2D is usually enough. And we start to shift those values, by this tolerance level that you set up here. This was what the customer asked you for. You printed this. They said no. That's not what it should look like. Part of the reason for that, again, not you guys. It is fundamentally what I've talked about RGB and CMYK. When the person sent you the file, they were looking at it on the screen. Or they were looking at it in under a night light. Doesn't matter, whatever. Your print shop, you have the right light settings, everything is great. But the customer is like, it doesn't look right. Sure, I don't want to spend time fighting with the customer on this. I know my shop is set up well to print properly, but I don't want to fight with him. I would do a swatch book with my target color, and in here we have what we call a visual or measurement swatch. This is where, again, we're giving you options. How scientific do you want to get with your rebuttal? If you do a visual swatch, you have this, you print this out, you show it to the customer. I've done this 1,000 times at this point. I did this with Ferrari, I did this with Delta Airlines in Atlanta. They will always speak, not this. They never say, this thing that they gave you is the correct one. They always speak something else here. That is why I said I don't like customers telling me what to print. I've never seen one person say, that thing I gave you is correct. And then when they pick that, when they pick this, whatever they pick in here, fine. You've picked this, you're good with this, you've said this is the color you want. You come back to Swatchbox, and you replace the values that we started with this for that print. The specific print mode you're working for with this customer, and then you've literally matched, their color recipe. And again, it doesn't matter what the numerical data they gave you is.
And do you do that in ONYX?
Yes.
Okay.
This is in ONYX.
I mean,
So,
you enter those values in just for that print?
so from here, so let's say he selected the one I've highlighted. If I just hit here from here, add to print mode, it adds into the print mode that I'm working on. We do have in the software, you could set this. So here we're doing just the print mode, but I will show this more in the tools class because this was split into two. But we have a way for you to set this up to not just affect the specific print mode, but you can use it, and it's what we call user-defined colors. So you can put it where every time a file comes in with this tagged Pantone, pretty much, it is the recipe you've chosen that replaces it. Now, the reason why we go with, going with the print mode first option is when you do those settings, rip wide, then you are affecting everything that comes in. And remember, when you did the visual swatch, the recipe wasn't wrong, but the person chose something else. Meaning customer B, you could literally print the same thing and you could choose something else. So we give you the options to make it system-wide or to make it just for the stuff you're specifically working on. But again, when it comes to trying to match those colors, this tool is pretty much what you need to match that color. And like I said, we do have a measurement swatch. This would be if I wanted to print a swatch that I wanted to read with a color device and prove again scientifically, like, hey, you gave me this, that is what I gave you. If it doesn't look right, maybe your recipe needs to be adjusted, pretty much. But this is a tool that we have in the ONYX RIP software that will get you to getting to match those corporate colors. Tying into this tool as well, this Swatchbox, again, since we're focused on color management, we have this color check. It is part of, it does come with our flagship product, Thrive. You need Thrive and you need a service contract. But what this tool does, so where Swatchbox helps you to get closer to those target colors, color check is a way to test if your printer can actually hit a specific color before you take the job. So again, is there a value in knowing I can actually do it before I end up, taking this big job, printing it, and then it gets sent back? Color check helps you do that. Color check requires a color device. I'm coming back to this general theme of having a color device in your shop will literally help your color management practices. So I'm supposed to give you guys time for questions. How long do I think? Okay, so to recap, color management, it's a wide range of topics. 45 minutes doesn't do it enough justice. These people that have been doing this for 10 years that are still learning new stuff every single day. But again, I was taught this when I first started, and it's usually the first thing I pass along to people. Those settings that I've told you about, check those settings. Make sure you have some sort of process control between what I used to design, and the RIP software. Do that first, go back, check that. If you've never done it before, I'm almost willing to bet you'll go back and find out like you've been using something different because you've never actually gone in there to check, what the default was. So go back in there, check that. Try, again, I'm not in any of your pockets, I don't want to tell you what to do, but try to see if you can get the color device in your shop It will literally help a lot of the things you do. When you're talking about color management, get a color device. If you're using the ONYX RIP software, play with the color tools we have in there. Start around with Swatchbox, something that doesn't need a color device. Print a visual swatch for Swatchbox. Go to the media manager, the profile manager. Some of your printers already come with pre-configured profiles. You know, in media manager in ONYX, you have a way of copying them. I wouldn't play with the original one. I would create a copy of it. But you have a way of creating a copy, going in there, and you'll see literally all the things that were done by those, to build those profiles. You can see certain information. You can literally use that to recreate something else. Play around with it. So profiling, making sure you have the correct settings, both in your design side and in the RIP software. Probably the first things I would say you want to get familiar with, and then you can start to explore the wider gamut of stuff that comes with color management. But that is typically the initial start, where you want to be at. In the second class, when I'm talking about the ONYX tools, I will dive more into, I will show Swatchbox again, and when I show Swatchbox, I will talk about some of the other things we do in ONYX to help color. These are not general color management things. These are specific tools we have in ONYX to help you get to those colors. A lot of them automated, a lot of them easy to use. Some of them will help you get closer, and you don't necessarily even need to go into like profiling steps. So this is my class. Any questions for me? Before I do that, I do want to introduce my boss,
No pressure.
who's walking here, stood at the back. This is Matt Crawford, Director of Product Marketing for Ronix Graphics. He's one of those, you've been what, 18 years?
20 in November.
20 in November. He's one of those, he showed me my initial, he hired me, taught me my initial color management. He's the person that can do a profile in 10, 15 minutes. That's him right there. He can, but again, I know he has a color device. You cannot, it doesn't matter what they say, there's no way to build a profile right now without a color device. You need to have one of those. If not, you will barely scratch the surface when it comes to color management.
The investment, I can't emphasize enough, the payback on the investment of the right tools, just as you guys know, to do your craft, right? Whether it's installing a wrap, whether it's sewing, finishing a banner, right? If you don't have the right tools, it takes you longer, costs you money, right? Color measurement device is, to me, the entry point of consistent, predictable, accurate color, and gives you the ability to create those profiles. And I'm sure Peter covered this before I came in, but it's not about just having that one profile, right? We want to print as fast as possible with as little ink as possible that meets the customer's expectations, right? Anything more is our donation, right? So we want to have a good, better, and best profile, in my opinion, right? So if you're printing a banner and you're going to hang it 30 feet in the air, you want to print it fast, you want that good profile. If you're printing elevator signs, smelling distance signs, we want that slow, we want that high quality profile. So anyway, to just emphasize what Peter said, getting that color measurement device is a great way to make sure that you can control it.
Do you have recommendations for which devices are
We sell a whole bunch of them, and honestly, we can go through your needs and talk you through there's entry level.
So I'll be, like I said, once this is gone, I'll be sitting at the booth there. So yeah, I can answer the questions about the devices that you can get.